Andrew, Ines, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Andrew, today we are going to talk a little bit about card games, what their place is in a world with so much hype around VR, AI, etc., right? And there's a lot of new tools for communication, but is communication really improving? What's the quality of our communication? How are we really focusing on that and about mindfulness, right? Um,
Okay.
but to talk about that, we're going to talk about your story and the story of a card game that you invented, Anomia,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
let's start from the beginning. What is Anomia?
Well, Anomia is a card game, as you mentioned. It's what's known as a party game, which is typically party games are usually kind of light games, maybe 20 to 30 minutes. Usually involve a lot of laughing. Um, and Anomia fits right into that category. It's just a deck of cards. There are a number of different versions of the game, but essentially the game is about um, quickly, under pressure, giving examples of different sorts of categories. Um, and the word anomia refers to when you have trouble thinking of a word. So when something's like on the tip of your tongue, you can't quite get to it. Um, um, And what happens in the game is, you're drawing a card, flipping it over so everybody can see your card, and the card has a category on it. And there's also symbols on the cards. And if the symbol on the card you've just flipped over happens to match the symbol on somebody else's card, then the two of you quickly have to face off by giving examples of the things on each other's category cards. So, if you and I have a match and my card says dog breed and my card says ice cream flavor, you would have to quickly name a dog breed like Labrador or German Shepherd before I could say chocolate ice cream or, vanilla or whatever. It's very simple, but when you're under that very quick pressure, your mind tends to go blank, and things that are sort of typically easy to name become more challenging. And so funny things like weird things may come out of your mouth, or nothing may come out of your mouth, or like the totally wrong thing may come out of your mouth. Um, so it's very funny. And then on top of that, what causes a face-off can change in the game. So throughout the game, so it's not always like you don't know who you're going to be up against at any given time, and you don't know what category you're going to have to come up with an answer for. Um, so it's constantly changing, and so it winds up being, a little bit intense. Sometimes people get overwhelmed by it. Some people love that about it. Some people get a little freaked out by it. Um, and Yeah, and so that's basically how the game plays. And then the story behind it is that um, I used to play a card game when I was a kid with just a standard deck of playing cards. That was similar to what Anomia is now, though it just uses a standard deck. And I thought, I used to play that game, when I was like 10 or 11. It was just what's known maybe as a folk game. Like, it wasn't any kind of official game. It was just a game I played with friends. And I always thought it could be sort of more interesting, more developed. Um, and so I thought about that for a long time, like from when I was, 10 or 11 till I was in my middle 30s. I kind of played with that idea mostly just in my head. And um, when I was in my mid 30s, I was like, let me just. I had sort of amassed a bunch of interesting experience, like work experience, and at one point I did a lot of print production work for a newspaper, so I had some desktop publishing skills at that point, and I was like, oh, I actually could make a prototype of this idea I've had forever. Let me just do that. And so I made a prototype, started playing it with my friends. Quickly saw a bunch of things I had to change about the basic idea I'd had, and then I started basically refining that idea. And I probably worked on it for 4 years or something, just on the side as I was living my regular life. And I refined the game until finally I felt like it was done. Um, and then I self-published it in 2009, end of that year, basically. November was when it first came out. And then fast forward to now, where Anomia has been, we've sold over 1 million copies. It's in many languages. There's a bunch of different versions. There's an adult version, there's a kids version, there's a bunch of general knowledge versions, there's a pop culture version. And I've got a bunch of other thematic expansions, in the works now. So has it far exceeded whatever ideas I had about it were when I started out. It's gone way past that.
That's an
So
amazing
yeah,
story,
it is
and
an amazing story.
many years on the making, almost 25 years of having the idea, but other than thinking about it, not really starting, getting started with some skills that you had learned on some of the jobs that you had, and then being able to prototype it and iterate, and test it and iterate on it, and
Yeah,
then really going through self-publishing when you knew that you were done. And you certainly had a good feel on when it was ready, because it became a success, right? So I have a lot of questions from there.
yeah, sure, sure.
Right now in your life, you dedicate yourself to it. If I had to ask, how does your week look like today?
Sure. Yeah, so I had another career, a couple of different careers maybe, over the years. I and Yeah, but I left my last job in 2015, and it was at that point that actually, well, I got let go from my last job. So it was my department was kind of disbanded, and so I was and I had been trying for a while to get my boss to let me go half time because I wanted to devote more time to Anomia, and she didn't go for that. So um, anyway, when I got let go, that was like the first time I'd ever gotten let go from a job. I'd never I'd never been let go, and it was it's a little bit not my favorite thing. Um, but I was also, I remember so well. They were, yeah, I met with like the publisher, and I worked for publishing company, and I met with the publisher and one of the other heads of the company, and they were sort of letting a number of people go, and um, I remember going to work that day and being like, well, I'm either going to get fired or I'm going to get a promotion. I didn't know which one it was going to be. And anyway, they gave me the news, and then they walked me up to HR, and the HR lady was very nice, and she was like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I was like, I'm great, actually. This is perfect. So she was a little taken aback. She was like, oh, okay. Um, and so it was nice to be able to go off into this new phase with like a little bit of health insurance for a while, like
Right.
and and I didn't know exactly how it was going to go. Like, we have 2 kids, we had a mortgage, my wife was looking a little freaked out, and I was similarly freaked out. But yeah, so now it's 8 years later, I'm pretty settled into this. And my week, day-to-day life is, working on Anomia stuff. I, now basically, um, I because I've licensed Anomia, so I have a number of licensing partners. I have a major partner in North America, and then I have other partners in other countries that do alternate language versions, like German or Polish or Chinese or whatever. So so those companies, thankfully, they take care of the really heavy lifting stuff, which is like manufacturing and distribution to retail stores. And so what I typically do is I work on expanding the product line, and that mostly is in the North American market. And and then so we started with one version of Anomia, which came with two individual Anomia decks, and then we put out another version which has six more kind of general knowledge decks. Then we put out an adult version, and we put out a kids version, which is image based, and so you don't have to be able to actually read to play that one. And then recently I put out a pop culture edition, which has decks that are all about like movies, internet, TV, music, stuff like that. And so I'm basically slowly, I sort of have a long vision for how many different ways you could make an Anomia deck. And um, I've been exploring that, and then also marketing. So that's, sending out, weekly emails, doing social media posts, doing in-person events. There's lots of big board game conventions that happen in the US. So I do a number of those every year. And um, so yeah, so my day-to-day is typically, focused on those things. Like right now I'm working on updating some of my existing products. So I'm just going through the category list and seeing like what's, maybe aged and needs to be removed and what kind of new things I can put in. Um, and then also, one fun thing I've been doing lately is I've been developing a little library on the Anomia Press website about of sort of digital products. So they're print and play. In the board game industry, there's a fairly large community around this thing called print and play, which is like you download a PDF of a game and you print it out at home and you cut out all the parts and you just make a version at home. So what I've been doing here is trying out different thematic ideas for Anomia. So like I've got a deck about food, a deck about animals, a deck about sports, a deck about uh, there's a blank deck. You can make your own. You come up with your own categories and make your own deck. I've got a deck of like all multiplication problems. A deck of tongue twisters that is a slight twist on how the game is normally played. And I'm basically or I'm now making a deck about Boston where I live. I'm making a deck about New York City. Um, and I've got some other ideas around like colleges. So I can make a deck about Boston University or any college, or I made a deck recently about University of Madison where I have a personal connection. So um, I'm basically trying these out as a way of looking at other ways to expand the game. Oh, and actually, a great example of this is I got a woman reached out to me who's a professor of creative writing and poetry at a small arts college north of Boston, and she had come upon the game. I think her students had turned her on to Anomia, and she was like, this would be. She was like, I want to make a poetry edition, So, and then there was like a poetry festival happening, so she invited me to come up, and we ran this little event where like, we had. This was just an event within a larger poetry festival, but we had, maybe 30 people come through, 40 people, and I would sort of quickly teach, small batches of them to play the game so they understood it, and then they went off to brainstorm ideas for a poetry deck, and then I'll take all those ideas and make a print and play, and maybe I'll print out like with one of my prototyping services, I could print out an actual deck for her, to use with her students and stuff. So there's lots of neat. I've had like teachers make decks about like physiology or Latin or like there's all sorts of like educational applications. Um, so I'm just having fun exploring that, making new decks, and it's great because it doesn't cost me anything. Just a little bit of time, coming up with the categories, um, and then one fun thing about that was that like the tongue twister deck I just kind of made that as a goof. Like I didn't really think. I just always thought it would be fun to have something like that. And then I was at a convention recently, and somebody came up to my booth and was like, I made that tongue twister deck with my family like on a rainy day, and they were like, that was so great. We had so much fun playing. You should totally make that into a real product. And I was like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. So so that's pretty nice.
Endless
And
possibilities,
yeah,
endless possibilities,
I
right?
have some other, and the other thing is like I have some other games that I'm working on that are not related to Anomia that sometimes they tend to languish in the background because I'm like, I should work on that, but so I do have some other stuff I'm doing,
Good
but
timing,
nothing to show yet.
timing, right? And do you have any regrets about timing? Do you wish you had launched it earlier, or do you think that the timing was perfect because all of your experience, you were able to put that into the game and launch such a successful game? Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think like, oh, maybe, instead of doing it, in my mid 30s, I could have done it earlier? Or maybe you didn't have the prototyping expertise that you acquired. How do you think about that?
I mean, well, no, I don't really tend to think about that too much. I think the big takeaway for me with respect to that was actually about prototyping. Like looking back at the chain of events that around Anomia, like I feel like it happened when it had to happen. Like my life experience was such that it emerged right when it should have in my life. And but the thing that one of the big takeaways for me was like when I look back at how long I thought about that idea, and this is something I try to impart on to other people, especially kids that I meet, like sometimes if I do a talk at a school or something like that, um, is the importance of prototyping because like that idea lived in my head for so long, and I had a lot of fun thinking about it, but once I actually made a simple prototype and put it in front of other people, it came to life. And then I could actually begin to see more about how to actually, like, was it actually fun? What was good about it? What was bad about it? And also lots of things that I could never have thought of, because I got feedback from other people. So that was my big takeaway was like, oh, and now this is like, fairly common practice in the world, certainly in like IT development, where you're like MVP and, you're like, get your simplest product out the door as quickly as you can and start getting feedback from other people because, um, you don't know what's important, and, only getting that, feedback from people is going to really tell you what that next feature is going to be. And the 20 features you think are crucial like may not matter at all. Um so for me it was like I wanted to put out a simple version of the game as quickly as I could, and then see. And I kind of always wanted to like have an adult deck and more general knowledge decks and all of those things that are now out in the world. But I knew that I should start, or at least I wanted to start somewhere. I had limitations, like had to, thinking about the capital I needed to do the first printing and stuff. Like there were limitations sort of put upon me. And so I just made a simple version. I made the first version has 2 decks and it's still in print. I mean, that's like, one of our best-selling games. Um, so so I think the timing was right on. And but but the thing that changed everything was the prototyping for me. Like that, once it became a thing that other people could manipulate and respond to, um, that's where I started to understand. I mean, it actually made me feel like, you know, when I would, once I had been prototyping it for a while, I'd go to Toy Fair, which is this big industry trade show. It's just business to business. It's in New York at the Javits Center, and I'd be walking around. I had my prototype in my bag, terrified to show it to anybody. And I think I even went a couple of years and never even showed it to anybody. And but the thing that I took away from my experience at Toy Fair at that point was there were so many games there that Anomia was like certainly equal to or better than. And I was like, okay, if these games can be for sale in the market, then there's no reason that Anomia can't also be for sale, like on a store shelf. Like it's a good enough. I knew there were plenty of games that were like way worse, so or just less interesting, less fun, so that was another nice thing about the prototyping because I knew how fun it was, after having played it. And I played it with, 200 people over the course of like 4 years. So like I had played it a lot.
Did you ever think it was going to be as successful as it eventually became and is
No,
today?
no, no, no. I mean, and in fact, like even along the way, I was like, after the first, like I did a little bit of it wasn't a Kickstarter. I didn't use Kickstarter, but I did a Kickstarter type approach when I was raising them. I raised money for the first printing, and I did that by spamming all my friends and all the people who had played it. And um, I'm a musician. I see you're also a musician there. I had a big mailing list from that part of my life, so I spammed that list. I just let everybody know what I was up to, and I raised, like something like $20,000 in about 6 weeks to cover the initial printing. And so um, that means that I pre-sold about 500 games, um, as a part of that. And then those games went out in November. Then I sold another 500 games right after that because it was the holidays were coming up. And then in the new year, I had still about 1,500 games left in my attic, and I was like, I have no idea what to do with these games. And they were like literally like right above my bed, in the attic. And I was like, they're gonna fall through the ceiling and kill me, in my sleep. And but at that point, I just didn't know. I mean, I knew I'd worked in like wholesale distribution. I had the experience of like running a company like that, so I knew like technically how to distribute a product, but I didn't have the distribution network, So then, like, so there was a point where I was just like, what am I going to do with all these games? Like, I had no idea. And then, slowly we started to get more games out and get into more stores.
Did it happen
So that
slowly and organically, or did anything happen like you found a new distributor, or you put them on Amazon, or did anything like
I,
move the needle and change the whole
yeah,
situation?
there were a few things that happened, a few key things. Like one, so I'd say there were three things that happened that first year that were kind of key. One was, we, one of the first retailers. So the guy who like designed the packaging for the original version of Nomia, he was like a guy that I was walking my dog. He had a dog. We started talking. He turned out to be a graphic designer, and I was like, "Oh, I've got this game. I'm trying to get out the door." And he was like, "Oh, cool. I could do your package design." I was like, "Great." So he turned out to be the nephew of, this woman who owned one of the local toy stores. So her store wound up being like one of the first stores to take on the game. and she really liked the game. So she was like giving me some coaching on joining one of the trade organizations, um, and that has like an annual conference, and that so you can have a booth and display to retailers, and then sell your game to retailers. So she was like, she was in the early days. She was very helpful in terms of like helping me wrap my brain around. Okay, I should go to one of these trade shows. I should exhibit, and um, and luckily that year the trade show was like, I live in Boston. The trade show was in Rhode Island, so it was very close by, so it was easy to do. And that happened in June. But prior to that, um, I had submitted the Anomia to the Mensa. Mensa does this. I don't know if you're familiar with Mensa, but it's like a sort of a smart people organization, and they do a board game. Basically, they have an event where they review like new games, and if you win the Mensa award, um, it's just kind of it's a nice badge of honor because it means that people like have really responded strongly to the game, and like I just find like there's something about those Mensa games, like they all are really good games. They don't always have like commercial success, but they are typically like great games. Like they're very lean and um, and really fun or challenging. They sort of can be a different. Lots of different kinds of games can win that award. But so we won the Mensa award in that spring, and then also we got a feature in the Boston Globe, like in the Sunday magazine, like a one page, full page little feature on it on me and Anomia. And so like between the Mensa award and the Boston Globe, I got like a sales rep reached out to me, and so I took him on as my sales rep, and that meant we started getting into like he would fax me, orders. If faxing was still a thing, I had to like I had to get like an online fax, you know, number so he could fax his orders to me. It was still very old school at that point, and so suddenly I was getting into more stores, and then because of him, and then and his sales reps, um, and then we got the Mensa award, and then we went to this trade show in June, and we won a big award there, and like we went that first year, we went from like I was in 3 stores in January, and by the end of the year, I was in about 300 stores, and we sold like 1,000 games our first year. That second year, we sold like 20,000 games. So it was like a big leap. It was a bit painful capital wise, like to have to pay for all the
Right.
printing and new printing larger quantities, and it was a little scary, but it was great.
Bigger problems, but good problems to have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you think are the benefits of card physical games?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a little universe kind of right there around the table for you to interact with your friends and family, and in a sort of more tightly controlled environment or set of rules than you might normally encounter in your day-to-day life. So I mean, at its core, it's entertainment. It's spending time with your friends and your family, enjoying, hopefully enjoying yourself, or um, and it just, basically just human connection. Um, so I think, that's pretty much as valuable as anything, like one of the more valuable things in the world, like as far as being a human goes. Um, so anything that facilitates that, I think is, generally
Do you
a positive thing.
you saw a lot into this world, right? Not only with Anomia, but going to those fairs, going to, prototyping, talking to different people. Like, you'll always like card games, but and those type of games. But I imagine you learn a lot as you got into it with Anomia. Will you say um people is playing less card games, same as always? It's just a world that doesn't get as much publicity as other types of games. Am I making sense? What I'm trying to ask
Yeah,
is, I look at video games and all of that, and you look at the narrative that exists, and the narrative kind of goes, oh, kids spend most of their day either with their phones or with their PlayStations or
right,
whatever.
right. Well, I mean, it's funny. Every year since I started doing this, um, like literally every year since 2009, there's always an article in some newspaper or somewhere about how board games are back. Like it's
Right.
just hilarious. It's like it's been 14 years that I've been doing this. I mean, like you could probably put that into Google and find a headline like that every year. And I don't know how far back it would go because I feel like there was a kind of turning point when things left, the kind of Candyland and Monopoly. I mean, though Monopoly is still a massive business, um, but like, you know, it is a very different market right now in board games than it was 20 years ago. And by that I mean like it's massive. It's huge. Like I'll go to a convention that's just for board games and you know, I mean the smallest one I do is like 35,000 people and the biggest one I do is, maybe 80 to 90,000 people. And that's just board games. Like then I do other conventions that are a mixture of board games and video games that are, in the 80 to 90,000 person range. And then, I think Kickstarter has fueled quite a large boom with board games. And there's a lot of people, a lot of independent inventors making stuff and self-publishing now, way more than, I mean, granted, things are a little different in terms of like you have more options as an individual who wants to publish something. There are now companies that specialize in helping people realize their ideas. Those didn't exist so much when I was, or that I knew of anyway, when I was starting out. And um, so there's like that whole Kickstarter aspect has spawned a whole new level to this. And very frequently I get, friends or family reaching out to me saying like, "Hey, I know this person. They've got this idea for a game. Like, could you talk to them?" And of course, happy to. But so I, yes, obviously, like video games are huge and very well established, but I sort of look at it like when the iPad came out and everyone was like, oh, magazines are going to go away because everything's just going to be on the iPad, or like when the Kindle came out and everyone was like, books are going to go away, it's all going to be on the Kindle. It's like, no, actually what's going to happen is, like I'm a great example of this. Like I, re I remember actually with the iPad, I was like all excited for, reading stuff on the iPad. And now I'm like, I'm so much happier reading a magazine or an actual physical book, than reading something on an iPad. I do use Kindle a lot, and I really enjoy that. But I also really enjoy reading real books and physical books. And I feel like the same thing is true for games. It's like you can play a video game. That's a very particular type of experience, and you can play by yourself or you can play on a team, a virtual team. I see this with my son who's uh, 16 and he does a lot of gaming and he plays a lot with his friends and a lot of his social life is sort of is mediated through, gaming. So he might not be hanging out in person with his friends all the time, but he'll be playing on a team with them, on his PlayStation. Um, uh, and or he'll be like playing a game and he'll have like a Discord conversation going on the side, on his phone or on his laptop or whatever. Um, but I just think I don't think video gaming or whether it be on a phone or on a PC or on a console is displacing board gaming. I just think you know it's just another thing. It's just another way of engaging, and one is not going to like supersede the other necessarily. So and I mean, the toy and the game industry is massive. So it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Certainly
if,
not going away.
if anything, from what you're saying, it seems that the virtual and the physical worlds are feeding off each other, right? And with books
Yeah,
and with magazines and I don't know, or even
and I
vinyl is
think
back, right?
yeah, and there's some back and forth between them. Like, you see things like a video game now becoming a TV show, like with The Last of Us, or you see um, a board game becoming an app, or you see an app becoming a board game. Like I've seen all those things happen, and now I've seen somebody making a virtual like a digital tabletop that is meant to. So instead of having a giant collection of games on your shelf, you have like this digital tabletop, and
Oh,
you can just play games on this virtual. It's like a giant kind of iPad type thing,
the
big screen,
Kindle
and then
board
it's
game.
got yeah, it's like more iPad, not an e-ink thing. It's more full color, but it's like, and then of course I think VR and AR will start impacting that as well. So and you'll be able to play. Maybe I could one day play Anomia with my friends, like spread all over the world, but we've got VR goggles on and we're playing like in a room somewhere, and we're able to actually have a game that feels just like we're sitting around the table, but we're actually in a virtual space. Maybe something like that could happen. Or any game. There's lots of other games kind of lend themselves to that. Like you could play them on Zoom, or you could, um, like you could play charades on Zoom, like without any trouble at all. There's lots of games you could already play on Zoom,
Yeah.
or in some kind of mediated tech environment.
Do you get excited about VR and any other what technologies are out there that are exciting you and you go like, wow, these are, game changers or
Um, I'm pretty interested in, you know, well, theoretically, I'm interested in AR and VR. I'm not typically doing anything with that in my day-to-day life right now. I feel like, I think that those I'm kind of more interested in like AR when I can have a product like, what you see in like Black Mirror where you have a little thing and you stick it on the back of your head and then you just see all the stuff and you don't, have to wear some big cumbersome head of thing of goggles. Um, like that's pretty interesting and compelling, and um, and I don't I'm I'd be curious to if there was some kind of lightweight you know eye tech that you could really integrate into your day-to-day life that had AR, a convincing AR overlay. I think that'd be pretty great. Like certainly useful, certainly great to like not have to look at your phone in your hand. I think this phone object will at some point be replaced by something a little bit more invisible. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. I mean, I think with any tech, it's like, there's the good and the bad. I've been in a little bit of a mode lately where I've taken like pretty much off most of the social media off my phone, and I'm trying to mostly engage with more long form content on my phone, and sometimes I even remove the browser and just it's just like go back to it just being a set of tools and not a set of endless distractions. I find it eats into my brain a little bit too much, and I don't like it. I don't like how it makes me feel, and um, I'm happier when I don't have that endless scrolling in
Yeah.
my life. So and it's concerning to see my kids like really have grown up on that. And actually, I was just talking to my daughter today. She's a camp, and her camp, they used to do this thing where kids could have their phones at camp, but they would take the SIM cards out, so they had no internet, connection. But this year they were like, no phones, none, nothing. And and it's a little frustrating because she's a musician and she's at this music camp, and so like your phone could be a metronome, it could be a recording device, it
Mm.
has all your playlists on it. Like there's a lot of useful stuff a phone can do that's not, endlessly distracting. But and she's really into her phone. And I talked to her today, and I was like, so how's it going now? It's been a couple of weeks, and she's like, oh my God, it's great. I love it. I love not having my phone at all. And so I was like, good. I'm glad she sort of at least saw that, got a little taste of that, because I think
I think
she
we all
sees
need
how
a
it
little
can.
bit of that. We all need a little bit of
Yeah,
that sometime during the year at least, right? Like
yeah, and she's like well, she's 15, so she just finished her first year of high school, and like, the social stuff is intense, early high school, and the phone just exacerbates all that. So, I think it was great for her to have a break. So,
yeah.
and then other tech that I am pretty into, like ChatGPT, and I've been using that as a tool lately, and it's been really fun, kind of hilarious, and also useful. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what that is going to be, what I'm going to use it for, like for work, but also like if I just have a question about something, I'm like, oh, this is really going to, this is almost like the new search, instead of me being like, hey, Google,
Yeah.
here's a question, and then I just get content that's already been generated that might answer my question. I can actually have a directive, like a very specific prompt to get the information I want quickly and succinctly, and not have to wade through a big you know video or article. So I'm really enjoying that, and I think it's actually going to have some pretty interesting impacts on the world. So
What?
Skynet, not
Yes,
what's
yeah,
coming, but
Skynet. Yeah, no. When I get to, I feel essentially the same way as you do, but when I get down into the rabbit holes and all of that of thinking too much about it, I get scared. I don't get scared as much as when we had all the hype about our AI, but yeah, that's definitely something that it's on the back of a lot of people minds. What do you do when you are not working, right? And it's I'm asking this question, and it's kind of a fun question to ask because it doesn't feel like work, right? I mean, it feels like when we talk about work that doesn't feel like work, your work
right.
will be on that category. But
Yeah. Well, marketing always feels like work, even if it's for your own products, like, because like, even though like I love Anomia and it's amazing, like I still suffer from like the classic, imposter syndromes, all that stuff. It's still there, and like, does anyone really want to get an email from me this week? Like, why? Why do they care? It's all real. It's all real stuff. I have two kids, so that can be, take up a lot of my time with whatever sports, and we all play a lot of music. So my kids both do music. I perform and write, um and then just my wife and my kids, like we just, depending on what's going on, what time of year it is, like in the spring, I coach baseball um, and um, you know, like my day to day is sort of like there's usually some kind of exercise, there's usually some kind of meditation, there's my dog who needs a walk, a couple times a day, there's work, there's music. So that's pretty much everything for me. Um, and um, and then whatever is going on with the kids, like if they need, we live in the city, so they actually at this age they both can get around pretty well on their own, but sometimes we're schlepping them around, or making dinner or what when just the classic family stuff. So it's pretty. I work kind of a mix between my house and I have a co-working space just like a 5 minute walk down the street. So I kind of spend my time between those two places, and then depending on then I have a fair amount of not tons and tons of travel, but I do four-ish maybe events a year, so that'll there can be a lot of prep around those, and then I'm gone away from home for those, so um sometimes, so it's a mix of things,
It's a
and then
very
trying to work on some other, I've got some other ideas. Like I have this is one game that I've been working on for a few years, and I have a funny rhythm with it. Like I kind of like I finally made a prototype after again thinking about it for a long time, and then started playing it with my son and some cousins, and then like I would so that usually when I play the prototype with them like in the summer when I see these cousins, and then I'd go off and think about it for the next part of the year, and then I'd like in the spring I'd frantically make a new prototype, and then we play it again in the summer. So I've been doing it for like 4 years. I've been doing that, and now I'm on to like I need to make the last prototype. Well, I don't know if it's the last prototype, but I need to make the next prototype, and sometimes it just takes me a long time to think about stuff, and like things like kind of slowly evolve in my brain, and a lot of that kind of thinking happens like when I'm doing something else, like walking my dog or whatever. So like I get a lot of ideas from actually playing it with people, and then I need to like think about those ideas outside of working on the game. Um, so yeah, so that's something else that can happen sometimes, but
it's a very nice mix of things that you do. I love your story. I'm very happy that you're prototyping on the new game. 4 years
yeah.
prototyping. You're getting close to the number of years you were prototyping with Anomia. So
Yeah, I only got like 20 more years to go, so.
yeah, no, but I'm getting. I'm ready for
Well,
to
actually,
do
no,
that
you're right.
one.
You're right. Because now
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah,
actually prototyping, it's like,
4 years prototyping. So Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me. I enjoyed our conversation a lot, and
yeah,
hopefully we can do this again sometime.
yeah, that would be great. I love that. And thank you so much for having me.